Alright class, today's lesson on adding integers. Remember we did just learn a lesson on what integers are. So just as a reminder, integers are a number, you can include 0 in there, but then if you start writing down some positives like 1, 2, and 3, those are integers. But then it's also when we throw their opposites in there, so the negative numbers. So when we put in here the opposite of 1 is -1, the opposite of 2 is -2, the opposite of 3 is -3, and so on. They keep going in each direction. So what we're going to be doing today is adding integers. So it's basically if you take a couple of these things, let's say we take -3 here, and I want to try to add that to any one of these other ones, like -2. I want to be able to know how to do that, what I'm going to get. So this would be an example of adding integers that have the same sign because they're both negative. -3, -2, and we have rules on what to do with that. And then also if we did something like -1 and I want to try to add to that something like let's take the 3 where I'm adding 3, where now the signs are different because I have a -1, I have a +3, so one's negative, one's positive, and we have a rule for that too. So really when it comes to adding integers, it's either the signs are the same or the signs are different, and depending on which one it is, there's a rule to tell us what to do with that. So let's go ahead and try a couple. Okay, the rule for same signs. If the signs are the same, we add them and keep the sign. So basically that's saying this, if the signs are the same. So real easy. First of all, if I do something like this, 3 plus 5, well, we all know what 3 plus 5 is. 3 plus 5 is 8. And the reason that works is because the signs are the same. They're both positive. There's a +3 and there's a +5. So simply, you're adding them together and keeping the sign, because what we're really doing here is if I'm going to use blue for positive numbers. It's like saying this. If I say that there are 3 dots there, and I'm going to use blue for positive, there are 3 there, and then we're going to add that to that, another 5. Well, because they're the same, we're really saying, well, how many total dots do we have here? And since there were 3 on the 3 here, and another 5 here, that gives us a total of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total dots. Okay, it's really what it's saying. But it's the same thing when they're negatives. So if I'm going to change to red here, and red can represent negative. I do something like -4 plus a -2, and a lot of times they'll put this in parentheses only because they try to separate the addition sign from the subtraction sign. That's the only reason they do it. But if we're going to do this now, again, I can make my dots, but if they're negative, that means I have 4 here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to add to that another 2 more negative, and since they're both negatives, we can combine those together. It's like they're on the same team, and we want to find out how many total negatives you have, and that ends up giving you had 4 to start with, and now you're combining with that an extra 2 more, which gives you a total of 6. And they are negatives, so your sign has to stay a negative. So again, the rule is when the signs are the same, you simply add the 2 numbers together. So up here we did 3 plus 5 gave us 8, and because the signs were positive, that gave us a positive answer, +8. Down on the bottom here, we had the -4 and the -2. So what we did was we added. Signs are the same, we add. 4 plus 2 is what gave us this 6. And since they were both negatives to begin with, that's how we got a negative answer. So again, the rule for the same signs. If the signs are the same, you add the numbers together, and whatever sign they were to begin with, the answer is going to be that exact same sign. Okay? If the signs are different, okay, this is when they tell us to subtract the numbers and keep the sign with a larger absolute value. And I'll explain that a little better. But if the signs are different, so this tells us if we're doing something like this. If I do -3, and if I want to add to that a +1. Okay, so you have a -3, you have a +1. Again, if I use my dots here to kind of try to explain this, this is saying, and again, red is going to be negative. So if I have 3 of the negatives, and I'm trying to add to that just 1 positive, really what we want to say is, since these 2 things are not the same, we can't combine them, all right? Every positive cancels out with a negative. So when we see this, all right, this negative is going to cancel out with the positive, and what we want to say is, well, what do we have left? Well, what we have left here that didn't cancel out is 2 of the negatives. Okay, that's what's left over. Again, so our rule is, if we're doing this, if we're doing a negative 3 plus a positive 1, the rule says here, if the signs are different, which they are, this one's a negative, this one's a positive, the rule is that we're supposed to subtract these two things. So we're going to take the 3 and we're going to subtract 1. So 3 minus 1 gives us 2. And then when it says keep the sign of the larger absolute value, really what this means to me is, the way I like to do it is, I just forget about the signs right away. Okay, forget about that and forget about this, and I look and say, which one's bigger, the 3 or the 1? Okay, well, if 3 is bigger than 1, well then if I go back and say, okay, since the 3 is the bigger one, but because the 3 is negative, that means the answer is going to be negative. So again, if the signs are different, we subtract. 3 minus 1 gave us 2, and since the 3 was a negative, there were more negatives, that's why we get a negative answer. Okay, so let's move on and let you guys try a couple here. So, find each sum. I got A and B here, 2 problems. I want you guys to go ahead and try this on your own, then tune back in for the explanation of how to do it. So pause the video. Okay, we're back. Alright, looking at this. The first thing I always ask myself are the signs the same or are they different? Okay, in part A here, I have a negative 54. I have a negative 28. That tells me the signs are the same because they're both negative. Okay? So the first thing I say is, if the signs are the same, they're both negative, I already know my answer is going to be negative. I'm even going to write that down there already. I know the answer is negative. The second step of the rule was, if the signs were the same, it said to add these together. So I'm simply going to take 54, I'm going to add 28, and do this. So 4 plus 8 gives me 12. 5, 6, 7, plus that 1 gives me 8. So that's an 82. But again, as we said, since they were both negative to begin with, that means your answer is going to be negative 2, because you're really trying to figure out how many total negatives do you have. Okay? Part B here. The first thing I see is that this 38 is a positive, because if there's no sign in front of it, it means it's going to be positive. And this negative 17 is a negative. Okay? If we forget about the signs for a second, so I cover up the positive and I cover up the negative, I know 38 is bigger than 17. So since 38 is bigger than 17, whatever sign the 38 is what the sign of the answer is going to be. So let's go back and say, okay, well, I know that the 38 was positive. That means my answer is going to be positive right away. Okay, because that has the bigger absolute value. Then the rule says this. The rule says signs are different. Positive 38, negative 17. Those are different. One's positive, one's negative. The signs are different, we subtract. So I take the 38, I'm going to subtract 17, and see what I end up with. So 8 minus 7 is 1, 3 minus 1 is 2. That leaves me with a 21. And as we said before, since the 38 is bigger than 17, the 38 is positive. It really means that there were more positives. So my answer is going to be positive. Okay, again, if you have questions on this, raise your hand, call me over, we can check it out, ask people in your group. Let's figure this out. Okay, example 2. So we have 3 numbers here to work with. Go ahead, pause it, give it a try, come back for the answer. Okay, we're back. When we do this, I basically like to do this one step at a time. So I'm going to take this first part here, and I'm just going to solve that. So I see a negative 4, and I want to add to that a negative 72. The rule is the signs are the same. It's a negative and a negative. And if the signs are the same, we're going to add them together. So I'll just do this off to the side here. 72. Go back. That's a really bad 72. Let's do this. 72. I'm going to add 4, which gives me 76. Again, because the signs are the same, they were both negative. That means that answer is going to be negative. So there's a total of 76 of the negatives. It's a negative 76. But now I have to finish the problem. I still have this plus 61. So now it's like doing a whole new problem. Okay, when we look at this, it's a negative 76 it's a positive 61. So now you have to switch rules. In this case, the signs are different. One's negative, one's positive. And as we said, if the signs are different, we subtract. So again, I'll do this off to the side. 76, and I'm going to subtract 6, which gives us 70. And now you're really looking at, okay, again, if we forget about the signs for a second, I just like to cover them up. Normally 76 is bigger than 6, so whatever the sign of the 76 is going to be the sign of the answer. And sure enough, the 76 was negative. That means my final answer is going to be a negative, so I get negative 70. Okay, final problems. Pause the video, go for it. Okay, you're back. Doing these problems. We've done expressions before. We're going to evaluate. So for part A here, x plus negative 9, they're telling me that x is negative 22. So just like we've always done, I take that negative 22, I plug it in. So it becomes a negative 22 plus a negative 9. And now it's no different than anything else we did today. The signs are the same because I have a negative 22 and a negative 9. Signs are same. We're going to keep the sign. And then, since the signs are the same, we're going to add these two things. 22 plus 9 gives me 31. And since they were both negative, we get a negative answer. So negative 31. Part B, we have three numbers here. We have an x plus a 17 plus a y. Just like always. Plug in what we know. Negative 22 is x. Negative 22. 17 is already there. I'm going to add the y to that. In this case, the y is negative 12. So that's going to be put in here. So we're going to add negative 12 to that. And again, sometimes you'll see parentheses around there. Kind of two ways to do this. You can just work left to right. You can do the negative 22 and the positive 17 first. Once you get that answer, then add the negative 12. In this case, for me, I'm going to do it slightly different. Since everything's adding, what I want to do is I'm going to try to combine the two things first, because I like adding better than subtracting. So I'm going to take the two negatives and do those first, because this tells me if I do those first, the signs are the same. So I have a negative 22 and a negative 12, so I keep the sign. 22 plus 12, we're adding because the signs are the same, gives me a 34. And since they were both negative, it's a negative 34. But then let's not forget that this positive 17 still has to come down. So I still have to add 17 to that. Now our final rule, okay, now we're looking at a new problem. The signs are different. I have a negative 34. I have a positive 17. I know my answer is going to be negative because 34 is bigger than 17. And since 34 is negative, I keep the negative. And then what I need to do here, since the signs are different, we're going to subtract 34 minus 17. We can borrow 14 minus 7 is 7. 2 minus 1 is 1. And we end up getting a negative 17 as our final answer. Okay, that's our lesson for today. Again, if you have questions, ask away.